Hello everybody, it's the last week of the It's Tricky series. One single tear, all the way down the face. I know you guys are really sad and you're probably going to want to hold a funeral, say a few nice words, put this series to rest. But we've had a lot of fun through this series. I hope you've had fun too. And today we're finishing the series with a very tricky question, which is, was the earth created in 7 literal days? Now, just like last week, I have to confess that I do not know the answer to this question because I'm not God. I wasn't there. The reality is that God could have created the world in many different ways and he would still be God. If God created the earth 13 billion years ago, he's still God. And if God created the earth 13 minutes ago and somehow we remembered our history and everything, then he would still be God. I think it's an important question to ask, and that's why we're doing a video about it. But ultimately, we have to remember that God is still God. He is the creator, and we worship him as creator no matter what. So instead of giving you an answer, I'm going to give you some thoughts. I'm going to talk about different theories that people have about creation, and ultimately, I'm going to give you a call to respond with love no matter what. So first, the context. Teaching without context is like eating pancakes without syrup. It might fill you up, but you'll miss out on the taste. So let's talk about the syrup. First things first, we've got to keep the center the center. I think that one way to talk about important things like this is to think about it in concentric circles. So the center of the center, that's like the most essential thing we have to believe. Without it, we have no hope in this faith. And really, I believe that the center of the center is Jesus Christ crucified. It's the person of Jesus and who he reveals God to be. It's also the gospel that Jesus gave his life for us on the cross. I like to put other things in that center, but really those are the only things that really belong there. The next circle is dogma. That's like ancient truths that the church has always held to. You could think of like the Apostles' Creed. The next circle is doctrine. These are really important things about God, but they're things that are contested and that we argue about. Not everyone believes the same thing, even if we still believe that Jesus is Lord. Beyond that is convictions, things that are opinionated, but to me it feels like sin and to you it's not sin. We've talked about that in the past in the video about vaping and alcohol. And lastly, there are opinions. Opinions don't really matter to our faith that much, but hey, if you have that opinion, then that's okay. The question that we're talking about, how God created the world, that is a doctrine that has changed throughout time. So while it's important, it's not the center of the center, and we have to keep that in mind all throughout this conversation. Second, scripture is not anti-science. See, when the church pretends that science is somehow an enemy, it doesn't usually end well. Hashtag my boy Galileo. You see, science and theology can actually coexist. They're actually old friends. I mean, how could they not? God's the one who created science. He's the one that created all the things that we're analyzing. But science can't tell you your purpose. It can only analyze data. And so let's not fall to the other side where we think that science is somehow more real than this theology and faith that we have. Last bit of context before we talk about the theories of creation. I want to draw a difference between evolution with a small e and evolution with a capital E. So small e evolution is simply the process of biology of how species develop. The way to put it is microevolution, that in a small way we know that these things happen to species. But capital E evolution is something altogether different. It's like an entire worldview that you must believe in its entirety, and it somehow goes along with atheism and believing that God has no place in the world. Now that's probably the evolution that you're thinking about when we talk about that, because evolution has become such a big worldview. But in reality, it's different than a small e evolution. But what about actual creation? Let's get to the actual question at hand. What happened in creation? First off, some people believe that the earth is flat. Oh, wait, that's a whole different video. Sorry. My bad. Okay, so the real first option here is the young earth theory. This would be the view that the earth is somewhere around 10,000 years old and that humanity is somewhere around 6,000 years old, and you can literally count back from the genealogies in scripture to come up with the entirety of the history of the world. This view would say that the earth was created in a literal 6-day process, 6 days of 24 hours, and it happened exactly like Genesis 1 says. One drawback to this view is that there's really compelling scientific evidence that the earth is is older than 10,000 years and that humans have been around for more than 6,000 years. So if you hold to this belief, you also have to hold to the idea that either most scientists have it wrong or that God created the earth just like in Genesis 1 with kind of a built-in history, if you will, of an earth that's already kind of aged or a humanity that's already kind of aged, which is kind of random, but God would still be God if that was true. The second theory is the day-age theory. So some people believe that Genesis 1, when it says day, it actually means an age, like a large amount of time, potentially even millions of years. It's a difference in translation and interpretation of the Hebrew word for day or age. The negative to this view is that this Hebrew word has passages throughout scripture where it's used as day and where it's used as an age. So it's really hard to choose between this one. It's kind of just a difference in opinion at that point. The next theory is the gap theory. Some people believe that between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, that there was a long gap, billions of years of a gap. Basically, God created the universe in Genesis 1:1, but then during this long gap, the creation turned to chaos and God had to almost restart the creation because it had turned into such a chaotic thing. And so then it comes to verse 2 and God starts to create order through these 6 days. So after that, you could take the 6 days as literal after the long gap, or you could take it as figurative. Either way, God would have created in verse 1, but then it was a long, long time before he continued. The negative to this view would be that somehow we're supposed to believe that creation turned to chaos before the fall in Genesis 3, but we're still kind of supposed to interpret Genesis 1-3 as things that actually happen. And lastly, the last view here is theistic evolution. Some people believe that the Bible and evolution can actually coexist. They believe that God spent billions of years forming the universe and millions of years forming the process of evolution that led to human creation as we see it now. Genesis 1-2 would be a non-literal interpretation or story that is representing what God did, but not exactly what God did. A negative of this view would be that there was lots of death and decay before the fall, and also that Adam and Eve were not the first two humans, but rather two of the first humans that God chose to be his people. The way this question is framed, it's trying to nail down what's literal and what we can get out of Genesis 1-2. The reality is that the Bible is not all supposed to be interpreted literally. There are lots of different literatures in the Bible. Take, for instance, the Psalms or the Proverbs. These are poetry. This is art, right? It's not supposed to be interpreted literally. For instance, no one argues about Proverbs 8 and whether or not it's a literal account of creation. Proverbs 8 is about Lady Wisdom and how she was there with God when he created. But we know not to interpret this literally because it's a proverb. It's poetry. It's an art form. And we don't usually ask, is art true? That's kind of a weird way to ask it. So maybe Genesis 1 and 2 are a form of art. Maybe Genesis 1-2 are trying to communicate a truth that mere facts of information cannot express. Maybe the biblical author was not trying to recount a scientific, literal account of creation, but rather trying to describe the creator. So much more that we could say. And actually tonight, when we go live, we'll talk a little bit about how it compares to other creation stories in the biblical world. There's actually some really cool ways that God's story draws specific truths about Yahweh that are different from the other gods. I'll end with a question that someone asked me many years ago. He said, Graydon, what is more impressive? That God could create a fully formed tree with just a word, or if he could create a seed this small that could turn into a fully formed tree? It's a trick question. There's not a right answer. To try and compare two things that are impossible for me to do, that only God could do, is just silly. God is amazing. He's incredible. And he is the creator, no matter how he did it. All right, guys, make sure you like this video, comment below your takeaway, and I want to invite you to share this video with someone who may be blessed by it. Maybe someone who's really interested in creation and science. Let them know that science and theology can actually be friends. Hey, we're excited to see you tonight as well. We'll go live at 7 o'clock. We want to talk about it. We're also going to be honoring our seniors tonight, so don't miss out. We'll see you then. Bye.